Shalom and welcome again to another edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast and TV show of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very, very much for being with us. As you know, these podcasts are designed to speak to the issues as a result of the revolution in longevity that is helping to restructure the entire Jewish community and our synagogues and our communities. We appreciate your support. You can visit us at our homepage, jewishsacredaging.com, or go visit us at our Facebook page, Jewish Sacred Aging on Facebook. And it is with great pleasure and great anticipation that I welcome to today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, Dan Libenson and Lex Rofeberg, newly ordained Rabbi Lex Rofeberg. So mazel tov on that. Dan and Lex from Judaism Unbound. And this completes this four-part series that we've been talking about how we're moving in our community from the pandemic, God willing, sooner rather than later. And we wanted to talk about some of the exciting things because you represent sort of like, I guess, if I'm permitted to say so, the non-traditional, non-institutional, non-synagogue movement that is really bubbling up with great creativity around the American Jewish community. And I really wanted our audience to get an understanding of really some of this outside the normal institutional bounds. So first of all, welcome, shalom. Again, Lex Mazel Tov. You have
you wish me a Mazel Tov also for not being a rabbi.
Yes.
No.
Equal mazzles to Dan.
No. I totally told you before. It's the best thing going. I mean, and you went to law school, right?
I did. Yes.
You seem hesitant to admit that. So,
well, I consider myself a recovering lawyer.
Oh, wow. Is that also is that a 12-step program, or do you just go like right to one step?
It's like 18 steps. It's a very, very complex situation. Yeah.
Well, congratulations. When you reach your higher power, let us know, whatever that may be for a recovering lawyer. On your website and the electronic information on Judaism Unbound, you have this really great statement that that's a project that catalyzes and supports grassroots efforts by, quote, disaffected but hopeful American Jews. I got to start by, what do you mean by disaffected but hopeful American Jews? Talk to me what that means.
Yeah, I mean, that originally came, sure. That language came from one of our board members early on. And for a while, it was just kind of language and that we would use, but I didn't sort of delve into it too deeply. But actually, we've been doing some strategic planning in the last few weeks. And I've come to feel like, wow, that language was kind of right on, because we're talking about a particular group of Jews, which I think actually is a huge group of Jews and this is like what the Pew study, however many years ago that was, that it talks about how, there were these Jews of no religion. And you would imagine that those are, somehow very distant kind of people from Jewish institutions. And yet, nevertheless, among that group, a huge percentage of them, a vast majority, said they were proud to be Jewish. And a sizable majority said that being Jewish was important in their lives. And I think that's kind of hard for a lot of people that are affiliated with the existing institutional landscape to wrap their mind around. They've assumed, and they've been taught to assume, that these people are kind of like not interested in being Jewish. And that is just completely and totally wrong from our point of view, that there are all these people out there. And I remember that from my own experience as a student and then as a professional working in the Hillel world, that you kind of have this notion that there are these people and they don't come to Hillel. I guess they're not that interested in being Jewish. And the more I'm in this business, the more I realize that those people are actually intensely interested in being Jewish. It's just that particular institution wasn't working for them. And that's the people that we're talking about here, the people that really want to live a Jewish life, but the institutional availabilities aren't working for them.
I will tell you that in my work with Jewish Sacred Aging for the last decade or more, when I would work with synagogues and say, look, this population, my generation, there's significantly amount of them leaving synagogues because they don't need any more kid stories, miracle stories, Bubble Meister story. They need to have a congregation reach out and speak to them and the lives that they're the stuff that they're dealing with, which is serious, and they need to know how their Judaism can speak to them. So I understand that some of that motivation, and there is a great search for meeting going on. Lex, how you're just coming into the rabbinate, you're just ordained, your career is ahead of you. You with Judaism Unbound, how do you see this organization that you're dealing with it working to do inreach to this, let's say, according to some statistics, 70%, 65% of the American Jewish community? If we accept the statistics, even recent statistics, there was a population study that was just released in February that talked about, the affiliation rate somewhere is 35, 36, 37, 38%, which leads a lot of people who aren't, quote, affiliated.
I'm glad you asked me that. Because I'm not affiliated. I'm not affiliated with the synagogue. So I think that that's a good place to start. And it's probably confusing for some people to hear that because, you started with I'm a rabbi, which is true. And I think is no less true. It's made no less true by the fact that I'm not a synagogue member. And I wanna clarify, it's not that I'm out there with a pitchfork and no, synagogues are bad. I am boycotting synagogues. It's just that I do a lot of Jewish things, and it happens to be that synagogue membership, I have been a synagogue member in recent years, but I was finding that I wasn't really, I was going every here and there, and I was helping out every here and there. And I felt the Jewish communities that I'm part of and that I'm building happen to not be synagogues right now. I'm part of, a recurring minyan that meets a couple times a month that isn't a synagogue that I lead every once in a while and also don't lead sometimes. I'm part of activist groups that have periods of great activity and periods of less activity. These are actively identifying Jewish activist groups. I'm part of, less official, not even pseudo groups, but just groups of friends that mark holidays together sometimes in the way that you might sort of call a chavara or something, but we don't call ourselves that. And I think for a long time, I was feeling a kind of guilt deep down, even as we're doing this unbounding work and we talk about how Judaism is all sorts of new things. I still thought there was a part of me that was I'm supposed to be a synagogue member. That's the right way to do this. And I really want to question that. And I actually want to be the rabbi that people can point to and say, not only are not rabbis synagogue leaders. I mean, people are aware that rabbis do lots of things, right? That not all rabbis are leaders of congregations, although, occasionally folks are surprised by that. But I actually want to be somebody who says, not all rabbis are necessarily synagogue members. There's other ways to do rabbiing, to do Jewish leadership work, to be out there in the Jewish ecosystem. And I take very seriously the work that I do, but it happens to not be happening in that particular sense. So, I mean, in asking about me becoming a rabbi, I've spent almost an obsessive amount of time thinking about what kind of rabbi I want to be and also what I don't want to be. And on our podcast, I've occasionally talked about this random person in Rhode Island who ran for lieutenant governor. And his sole platform was he was going to eliminate the lieutenant governor position. That was literally what he said he was going to do. He's it's a waste of money. I actually disagree that the lieutenant governor position is a waste of money. I didn't vote for that person, but I've talked about I am becoming a rabbi so that I can shift, maybe not fully eliminate rabbis' existences, although, I don't know, maybe one day, but what I want to do is I want to change things so that we don't think rabbis are the only ones holding Jewish authority and holding Jewish leadership. And so I happen to be doing that now as a rabbi, which brings up complications and opportunities, but I'm excited about it. And I was also excited about it before I was a rabbi, but it's different now.
So what is Judaism Unbound? How do you coalesce those two things that you both were talking about and formalize that into some sort of program? So what is Judaism Unbound? I know it's a podcast, but is it more than the podcast?
It's definitely more than a podcast. I mean, it wasn't supposed to be a podcast. I mean, actually, the original idea was to write a book, and then we got kind of stuck on the book and decided we needed to do more research. So we thought we'll do that in the form of a podcast. And so actually, 5 years later, we're kind of in this position now. Actually, COVID helped in that sense because there were all kinds of opportunities to do new things. And so we've tried to really establish over the last year that we're not just a podcast and that this is really a kind of a movement. And I don't mean a denomination. I mean a movement of people to try to accomplish something. And to my mind, what that is that that it's to understand the people that are not affiliating with the set of institutions that we now think of as defining Jewish life or Jewish involvement, to not think of those people as people who are saying no to something. It's to think of them as people who are potentially saying yes to something that simply doesn't exist yet. And the question, and I think what I want Judaism Unbound to become is the process of those people who are, I think of them as having already wandered into the wilderness, and these are the people who are on the cusp of the new Judaism, but it hasn't come about yet. So they seem unaffiliated, but they're actually pre-affiliated. And what would it look like to enlist them in the process of developing that Judaism that they will then become affiliated with, right? And so that's what I think this is really all about.
I like that pre-affiliated. I mean, it's like when you get when the credit card thing comes in, you're pre-approved. So maybe that should be part of the naming ceremony. You're pre-affiliated for the rest of your life. So Dan mentioned these programs, some of the things that Judaism Unbound, other than the podcast. Lex, walk me through some of these things that are part of this program.
Yeah, so it's been really incredible because we started this a little more than 5 years ago now, and we tell people, they think we're being modest. We tell them like we didn't know what we were, and we really didn't. We started the podcast even without knowing exactly what it was going to be. We kind of wanted to write a book eventually, and we were like, oh, there's people we want to interview for this book or we want to talk to for this book. And if we reach out to them randomly, they have no reason to talk to us other than if they're like being nice. But if we do it as a podcast, then they'll talk to us. So we did. And then like more people were listening to the podcast than may have read the book, although we still kind of want to write the book. But anyway, what we also realized after a little while, at least this has been important for me, is we realized like, it's not just a happenstance that part of our organization is Dan is in Chicago and I'm in Providence, Rhode Island, and we do things digitally. I think at first we were like, oh, some organizations are offline, some operate largely online. We happen to be doing stuff online. But I realized pretty early, like, that's significant. And we had an opportunity to be a digital Jewish organization and to sort of own what that means. And so what we started doing pretty early is playing around with like, what's a digital holiday observance? Like, what is it to mark Jewish holidays online? And, now in 2021, that feels so easy and intuitive because we've just had this pandemic. 5 years ago, to ask that question, even bringing it up got us a lot of pushback. The idea that you could or would look to have Jewish communal gatherings online and not offline I don't want to say it's heretical. Nobody told us we're heretics. People don't tend to talk about us that way to our faces, but I do think it was controversial. And so we did it though. And we started with Shavuot Unbound, which was not a video chat. It was just, we're going to put a bunch of interesting content online and encourage people to engage with it during the holiday of Shavuot. And we had hundreds of people do that the first year. And we got feedback from people that these were not folks who had done Shavuot before a lot of the time. For some, this was their first time ever even hearing of it. And so that planted in me like, oh, we kind of have a responsibility. Like if we're one of the only digital projects, it's almost like we're in a zip code or we're in an area that is isolated and doesn't have that many Jewish institutions. And there's Jews in that area looking for Jewish things, and the area is the internet. And they don't necessarily have those yet. And so then I was like, oh, we did Shavuot. I guess we should have some things for the bigger holidays. And we started stuff for Hanukkah and Passover and Rosh Hashanah and all that. And we eventually started to do this via video chat and create these live gatherings. And when the pandemic started, we really went into high gear on that. And we launched an entire project called Jewish Live, which literally within the first 48 hours was reaching a huge amount of people. I mean, our first program, I believe, was with the Jewish Women's Archive, just a book club that I sent a Facebook message to the Jewish Women's Archive because they had an existing book club, like a list of books. They hadn't actually gathered people online to talk about the books. But I was like, hey, you have this list of books. Want to just invite people to come to Zoom and do that? They're like, I guess, let's do it. And we had 1,000 people sign up, and 500 came to the first edition. The 1,000 that signed up would come to some of the future ones. There's a hunger for this. It's not just heretical. There are people that really want access to different kinds of Jewish programming, Jewish content, whether it's holidays, whether it's book clubs, whether it's everything else. And now we're seeing it happen because it had to. But we were trying to be doing that even before that need was sort of recognized.
Yeah, I mean, we're also seeing in adult education this, especially in our generation, a huge increase in numbers of people who are now familiar with going to online and going to lectures for not only services, but I'm talking about significant quality adult education, which would not be available to them in their synagogue. In fact, was talking to one colleague who I was doing some teaching for, who said, some members now prefer, they can go to, hear this person in London or this person in Los Angeles or Toronto. They don't want to, what can I offer? I can't compete with that. He said it half serious, half joking, but then we're seeing this increase because as more and more people get used to the internet. And so are you doing services? Really, you're talking about holiday observances, Shavuot, Purim, Hanukkah, et cetera, Have you done Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur services, Erev Shavuot services, Yizkor services? And is that a plan of yours, or is that something, we're not ready to do that yet? So,
Dan, can I take a crack at this to start and then pass to you? As far as I can remember, we have not done anything that we have called services. Is that true, Dan? I think that's true. Now, that said, what?
Yeah, I can't think of any services that we ourselves have organized. We've broadcast a lot of services.
Yeah, we've definitely amplified. We've had entire sections of our Jewish Live website where we're amplifying services run by others. And we also, through Jewish Live, will stream services to Facebook Live and all that, which we love doing because it helps many communities reach more people. It helps people who don't know where to look find services. That's all wonderful. We have not created anything we've called services ourselves, but I'm being careful about how I say that because there are events we've done. I'm thinking of our Purim event we did recently. I'm thinking of our Shavuot 24-hour learning festival we did last year, which while they're not services, I would call them, and maybe Dan would use different language, I don't know, I would call them religious observances. I would call them sacred gatherings. I experience them, if I go to them, I don't feel like I have to also go to services because I haven't done the services. We design them so that people can do them as their experience of that holiday. And first off, I think that in general, we should be broadening what services means. I think that's a useful project, but I think it's important for a lot of people who, for good reason, for bad reason, have negative associations with the idea of services, prayer, anything to create other avenues that are deep, that are intellectual, that are spiritual, that are thoughtful, that are engaging, that they can take part in on holidays. And so we've tried to do that. I'd be interested if we polled our attendees, and said, hey, would you say that what you came to on Shavuot was services or filled that role for you? I think we'd get a rich diversity of responses. Dan, what would you say about that?
I would bet you get a lot more people saying, yes, it was filled a spiritual, it nourished my spiritual hunger. I would bet you that would be the majority of people response. That just based upon my experience.
Another piece to just put out there is that I think there's part of what we do as a platform and part of what we do is actual content creation of our own. And I would say that um, like Lex said, right up until now, we haven't really done more things that look like services in a more traditional way. But I wouldn't say that we wouldn't do that. It's just that it happens to be that the members of our team currently, that's not our main interest. But if our team were to expand, I would be very interested in having services but that the services would be driven by the needs of the people who are not being well served by the regular services. And like, what is that? Maybe the answer would be they don't want any kind of services, but it would be very interesting to find out.
Yeah, it would be. It would be. I have a funny feeling, just based upon my gut instinct, and I have a funny feeling that people would be the more, quote, whatever that word means, spiritual and opportunities, gatherings, et cetera, programs, whatever the right word is, would take precedence over, yes, we would like a formal Friday night service, or if we do something like that, less formal, more informal, more interactive. Dan, what's the new Jewish future, or the next Jewish future, that program?
Well, that started as just our formal 501c3 name, because I had actually won this award and we needed to create a nonprofit organization to take the money really fast. And this was like many years before the podcast started. And, we kind of had to come up with a name. So I wanted to call it the Center for the Jewish Future, but Yeshiva University had already had a thing called that. And so we said, how about the Institute for the Jewish Future? And then one of our board members said, actually the same board member who had the whole idea about the disaffected but hopeful, said, how about the Institute for the Next Jewish Future? And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds good. And, and that was initially kind of our kind of holding company name. And I think that since Judaism Unbound took off as a podcast and took off sort of as a brand, I think our plan is to kind of flip it so that Judaism Unbound will be the name of our whole organization. But then the idea is that we do want to have some kind of, call it a think tank, something that's really about looking at what's happening and kind of trying to understand what's happening out in the world and kind of reflecting back or pushing back those ideas into the field and kind of have a cycle where we're both learning from what's happening on the ground and we're also feeding ideas back into the ground so that people can understand what they're doing, to be not just, I am affiliated, I'm not affiliated, I'm doing this, it's fun, whatever, but actually saying, no, I'm actually part of this movement. I'm a part of this new way of thinking about Judaism that has language, that has, all sorts of clear ideas. And so I think there's a need for that. So I think that if I were to say, what do we hope that the Institute for the Next Jewish Future, that part of our work will become, it's really that, think of it as like the, lahavdil, as we say, like, God forbid it should be like this, but like the Heritage Foundation is to conservative politics.
Oh, no.
The Institute for the Next Jewish Future could be towards this Unbound Judaism movement, really that thought leadership piece of the work. And there are pieces, like, I'll just give you one example of a piece that I think is sort of relevant, that sort of comes out of that's been very useful to me as I've been reflecting back sort of what's going on in the world, is that I've said, the Jewish infrastructure that we have, if you really understand the economics of it, it's structured like the way that a gym is structured, right? Meaning that when you think about how a gym membership works, the gym only works if most of the people who pay the membership dues don't come. Because if they all came, there wouldn't be enough room for them, there wouldn't be enough machines, et cetera. And that's really how the synagogue world works today. That if everybody all of a sudden wanted to come, the synagogues wouldn't be able to handle it. So the whole and why I'm putting this in the category of thought leadership is that I think it's helpful to reflect back to the Jewish world today. Like, hey, we see this as, successful, and we're lamenting that this isn't working so well and it's bumping along and will it last? But another way to think of it is it's actually profoundly unsuccessful, right? That our Judaism, even in its heyday in the 50s, the 60s, whatever that was, it was working only because there was this large number of people who are willing to pay a lot of money and not actually use the product. And that's not a Judaism that we want. And so the question becomes, what would it look like if we had a Judaism where everybody who was paying was using the product, or whatever the right analogy is. And I think it's helpful to be able to have, a team of people thinking about what's happening and trying to reflect analogies and language into the field like that to try to both explain what's going on, but also shift the lens from saying this is not a response to a crisis. This is actually the taking advantage of an opportunity that has been there all along that we've never fully addressed. And that's why one of the things that I think is relevant to the topic of this podcast, aging, I always want to push back against the idea that this is a generational issue. I actually think that what we're seeing, that the generational issue is that people from the older generations are the difference between them and people in Lex's generation or my children's generation is that they were willing to pay for Jewish institutions that they didn't use. And younger people are not willing to pay for Jewish institutions that they're not using. But I don't think it's all that different among the generations as to whether or not people were really excited about the Judaism that was on offer. And I think that if we would come to a place where we would see that actually it's not that the younger generations are drifting away, it's that the older generations weren't happy either, but they were willing to kind of pay the dues and do various other things because of various reasons about how they were raised or whatever. If that's really the only difference between the generations, then the issue has actually always been the same, which is to create a Judaism that's more exciting and compelling. And that's the challenge that we've just not addressed at all over the last 200 years.
Well, I mean, from the ballpark that I play in, which is, the, for want of a better term, the AARP generation, people over the age of 50, when I talk to congregations, as I do all the time, and ask them this question, exactly what you're talking about, we frame it in a sense of the theological stuff, but it really is why are you still a member? And the answer almost universally is, I'm a member because these are my friends. These are the people who we started with in preschool. These are the people who were there at our weddings, our bar mitzvahs, our bat mitzvahs, our shivas, et cetera, et cetera. It's community, it's relationships, not theology. And you're also seeing, and this is one of my pet things when I go out and teach, or even now online, is that significant numbers of our generation who are having to restructure their own priorities is saying, and this is a result of the pandemic, I think, I don't need to pay $2,500 to be a member of Temple so-and-so because I can get anything I want on the machine. And now, after a year and over a year, I'm very comfortable with that. I'm getting more comfortable with that. And I can still have my friends in my community. And this is an unpopular statement to boards of directors of congregations, because I do this a lot. I mean, I basically said, I did this to the board at McCore when I was their rabbi, and other congregations now that I work with. I said, look, and you're in a major metropolitan area, there's no reason to be a member of a synagogue. I can get anything I want on the machine. And it's and sometimes, and now a lot of times it's very high quality. What I want is a sense of meaning. What I want is a sense of what the losses I'm dealing with, or the excitement that I'm feeling when I'm this, or when I turn 70 or 80 and look to a future. Where's my faith? Where's my community? Where's my Judaism? So this is why I wanted to talk to you guys, because this is, to me, we're in the middle of this tremendous age of transition with a tremendous amount of creativity being pushed out that we've never seen before. I think this is one of the most creative moments in Jewish history, certainly in American Jewish history, bar none. Before we move on, somebody wants to get in touch with you. Somebody wants to say, wow, this is something I'd like to look at. Give me the email address. How does somebody connect with you? What is it?
So fast. There's many ways. We've got Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of those things. And you can just type Judaism Unbound and we will come up on any of those. There's our emails are dan@judaismunbound.com and lex@judaismunbound.com. Easy, simple. Don't even need to know our last names. So that's how you get to us. I did have one more thing on the aging piece that you talked about, but I don't want to.
No. Listen, you're the guest. Go ahead. Talk to me.
Great. No, I just, when generational questions come up, especially in the context of like why we exist. First off, I strongly agree with what Dan said. I don't think that what we're doing somehow only speaks to younger people. I think this is
Not
across
at all.
many,
Not at
many
all.
ages. It happens to be that podcasts are listened to a little more by younger people, although even that's changing. But
It is.
I think in the Jewish world, I think a lot about ecosystems and niches that are filled, and just, healthy ecosystems have different species that fill different niches, and together they create an ecology. And if one species goes extinct, all the other ones, or many of the other ones, can suffer. And when I look around the Jewish ecosystem, I think that the niche that is being filled enough, or maybe too much, is the niche where we are looking back and asking, what would my grandparents be rolling in their graves over? What would my ancestors be absolutely furious about? And then institutions are like, oh my gosh, if certain things were to happen in this space, so like our grandparents, I can picture them. They'd be so furious, and we gotta. I know that there's reasons to change, but like we kind of gotta resist, because there's a Jewish inheritance that we're receiving, and there's certain boundaries that exist. What I want to do is I want to ask, what will one day our Jewish descendants have rolled over in their proverbial graves around? Now, the issue there is we can't envision them. I had 4 grandparents in my head whose relationship to Judaism were complicated and different from one another, but I can picture them. Now, we want organizations to exist, and we try to be an organization that is thinking, what things that if they don't happen now, like what things need to happen in Jewish life today or in the near future, such that 2 generations from now, those Jews are not in a situation where the world has changed and the Judaism hasn't. Like, we have to be anticipating some of that. And it's not that we can see the future, but it is that we can at least try to look at trajectories and build worlds that will be the kind of Judaisms those people are not only, willing to pay membership for, but actively excited to be co-creating. Like, that's what we kind of want to do.
Well, and with that, I mean, putting on my old class and this one professor I had at HUC who transformed my way of thinking about everything, Dr. Rifkin of blessed memory, who really taught us that Judaism has survived because it had the courage at various periods of time in our history to innovate, to radically change the definition of Judaism, whether it's moving from a nomadic people to a building, whether it was Jeremiah 29's letter to the exiles in Babylonia saying, hey, you're there, marry, worship, God can now be worshiped in another country, et cetera, to the Pharisees, to the rabbinic period, to the birth of modern scientific Judaism in the 1800s. We've survived because we've had the courage to look ahead, not behind. It's that bet, it's the bet that's open to the future, but not forgetting, but taking with us, which is an image I like to use on the high holidays, and feel free to take it. I think this is where we are right now. We're moving out of this pandemic, and I think we're really understanding that we are in this tremendous age of transition. So my question to you, and I'll throw it out to both of you, are there any limits at all in your understanding of your Judaism? Okay. And as this conversation comes up in Judaism Unbound, are there any borders? How far do you push that fence around the Torah, to channel the Midrash? Is there a place, well, we can't go. This is no longer really Jewish, or, something? There are no limits. It's a toss-up question.
I don't, to me, there aren't limits. The limit is only that, I think it has to be in some fashion engaged with what Judaism has been. But that just means that, it's not, I don't think, look, I mean, I think people can do what they want. And ultimately the limit is anybody going to follow you? So like, I'm not afraid of somebody even just like making up something out of whole cloth saying it's Judaism. Go ahead. I think nobody's going to follow you, so I don't think we need to police that. I think the question is, it's a combination of like, it's really about what's going to be useful, what's going to work. And one of the things that I've realized, actually I was talking about this with my good friend Binay Lappy earlier today, that when I say some cool idea that I've had about, the Jewish future to somebody, a lot of times they're like, oh, that's interesting. That's, good idea, whatever. And I can't tell if they really liked it or not. When I say to them, hey, it's just like, this feels to me like it's just like the wandering in the wilderness. And, it's just like, wow, people want to be in small groups. And that's just like Jethro's advice to Moses, where he says, you should appoint captains of 10s and captains of 50s and whatever. And that's how we get through a period of transition. I get a reaction of people like, oh my God, I just had goosebumps when you said that. I think that what people want is a connection to what's come before, and so I don't think that we have to say there are any limits. I think in fact to try to police a line and to limit is all that does is it chills creativity. And so I think what we should do is sort of teach people to tell stories, and we should offer people who often don't know that all these stories that we have, whether it's in the Torah or the Talmud or like Lex is often talking about, like the books that were rejected from the canon, like the Book of Jubilees, that all of this material is this material that we can draw from, and it's actually quite relevant and powerful. And if you do, probably there's a lot of wisdom there, and also it's probably going to make it more likely that people are going to get excited about what you're talking about and follow you. But I don't think that we have to set any limits in advance. Lex?
Yeah. I mean, I'm a math guy. And so when a question about limits comes up, I think about the literal question of mathematical limits. First off, I'm part of a millennial generation who holds as one of its heroes, Katie Heron from the movie Mean Girls, who has a famous line, "The limit does not exist," which is the answer to a question that she's answering mathematically. I hold that quote with me very, very dearly. And I also think that like somehow it makes us uncomfortable. We're deeply uncomfortable with the idea that things would not have limits. But I don't know if you two remember your high school classes with limits, but like the most common answer to what is the limit of this function is either infinity. So like just infinitely, like infinite on the positive, negative infinity, or the limit does not exist. Those are the most common answers. So it shouldn't make us uncomfortable to inhabit a society that doesn't spend so much time saying this is exactly what we are, this is exactly what we're not. Like the literal fabric of our actual existence, defined through math and physics and everything else, has lots of infinities, has lots of negative infinities, has lots of no limit things. I also like No Limit Holdem. It's a much more popular game than Limit Holdem, to say the poker game, Texas Holdem. And I think it's popular because when you have no limits, and there's not rules dictating X, Y, or Z that you can and can't do, the actual game is more fun. I want Judaism to be fun. I don't want it to be about whether we are holding to the right boundaries or not. Like look, I get why that's important. And I get that at the end of the day, we do have to have something that Judaism is and isn't, or at least what Jewish communities are and aren't, sort of. But, I love so many people whose answer to "Are you Jewish?" is, well, sort of. Those people have a lot to teach us. I have a lot of, and I'm thinking of people born Jewish who would answer that way. I'm thinking of people who not born Jewish who, partially thought about converting, who are dear friends of mine. I'm thinking about people that aren't Jewish at all, but spend a lot of time with Jews. Like those are all part of my team. So if I'm interested in learning from all those people, whatever their status, from my perspective, I'm interested in doing a set of things, Judaism, Jewish adjacent, whether they fit our perfect definitions or not. And as those definitions change too.
Dan and Lex, it's just fascinating conversation, and I just want to wish you continued good luck. It also, what you're saying, reaches again this tension. We want to embrace the future and grab hold of it and make meaning, and at the same time saying, what do we hold on to that still speaks to my soul as we move into this unbelievably creative and powerful future. It's really a lech lecha. It's Genesis 12, and in a very large sense right now. And so I congratulate you for leading part of that charge into the land in which we do not know where we're going yet. So thank you very, very much. And continued success with Judaism Unbound, Dan Libenson and Rabbi, newly Rav, and again, Mazel Tov, Lex Rofeberg. Congratulations. Thank you very much. Continued success. Stay safe. Stay healthy, everybody. That's the most important thing. Take care. Keep in touch.
Thank
Be
you.
good.
Thank you.
And to all of you, thank you again for listening and watching on today's Seekers of Meaning TV show and podcast from Jewish Sacred Aging. Remember, the show is available on Roku. If you don't know what Roku is, as I say, ask your grandchild. They'll be able to set it up for you in about 30 seconds. Again, we welcome your comments and suggestions to me, Rabbi Address at jewishsacredaging.com. If you'd like to make a tax-free donation, go to the website, jewishsacredaging.com, click on the conveniently located donate button, and just follow the prompts. Seekers of Meaning is produced in the broadcast center of Lubetkin Media Companies, and a big shout out to our producer, Steve Lubetkin. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address, and I look forward to greeting you on our next Seekers of Meaning TV show and podcast. In the meantime, stay safe, stay healthy, wear your mask when you go out. Shalom. See you next time. Take care.